I get my... There we go. Okay. Great. The ideology of this talk is probably another talk in itself, but I'll just simplify by saying that this really started 2 years ago in Brazil at the meeting that Sergio organized, and had some discussions with Bill Mace, and Phil Rubin and I talked about it. He was part of that venture as well, but was not able to attend, but we did it by remote. Basically, Rubin and I we've spent our entire careers trying to fit the work of J.J. Gibson into our interest in language. And it's a very, very difficult fit. And so what I'm hoping to do today is bring in, to introduce a little complexity to the problem, maybe more than you want to deal with, but which he and I feel that we need to be dealing with. And I don't think it's in any way contrastive or combative. It's additive and expansive. I mean, I've spent 30 years, and I blame most of this on Turvey, who was an indirect influence, trying to connect behavior with descriptions of behavior. When I went to Haskins in 1982, this was my goal, was to learn how to do this, and it's caused me trouble ever since. Now, better minds than... Not too high. Yeah.
No problem. You can record it for me on this. I think now it's recording both sessions on video.
Detail so rich. I need you. You think it's love? No. He has offloaded it. I think they know that. They're trying to fix the problem. But keep going. We can see.
Okay. Certainly much better minds than me and Rubin have stumbled over the same problem, which is trying to understand time-varying coordination. And as far as we can tell, this requires teasing apart the dynamic mediating effects of language/cognition on perception, the benefits of such mediated and indirect perception in achieving high-speed, but not necessarily accurate, prediction of classified outcomes, and establishing communicative common ground, not too context-specific, otherwise you won't get that common ground. And the crucial but multiply concurrent roles of unmediated direct perception connecting the biophysics within and across entities. This is sort of our problem. To give you an example, consider the following. This is an interesting group behavior. It can only have happened in England, and that will be an important part of this. I don't have sound. This is the beginning of the criminalization of 1985. Let's go to Mercury, winding up the crowd. And watch what he does here. This is taken from early on in the song. He's showing the audience what he wants them to do. And you will see that they are doing it. He's controlling it now. Okay. That was within the first 20 seconds of the song. Now look, maybe a minute later. You should be able to detect a slight improvement in coordination with the crowd. And actually, you will see a little decoupling in that he can bring his arm down and rest while the crowd has the timing of the music for the arm movement. Now, we've analyzed this with correlation analysis, a number of other kinds of analysis. We've actually shown that there are measurable differences in the degree of synchronization of the audience within amongst themselves, as well as with the performer, between that early and late. That's not the point of this. What is the point is all the things that go into this. Now, just to show how clever this guy was, that song was directly before the next song, and Freddie knew that you can only run the same gambit once, and then you have to change, and he goes from a strict synchronization of visual behavior to now an auditory call-response format. Turn it up! Yeah. Singing in closer harmony than a lot of choirs. And as I say, I think this is only something the British can achieve. Now, what's interesting about this is that to pull this off requires a combination of many, many factors. There's a combination of intention on the part of performer and audience to participate, shared knowledge of the music. That crowd came into the stadium knowing the songs. There's no way they could have done this with shadowing. They come in without knowing it and then just follow along. And of course, there's this all-important shared anatomy and physiology, which gives you the scaling. It would have been very hard to see this synchrony between elephants and people in the crowd. And their concurrent systems have mediated what we're calling mediated cognition and language and unmediated age and environment perception. Now, mediated perception is principally symbolic categorical and makes self-consistent, and this is important, it is self-consistent, predictions, not necessarily good ones. Unmediated perception involves direct sensory coupling with environmental events to create environmental signals. Environmental signals don't exist without the perceiver, and that's very important in our view. Now, assuming cognitive processes were in place here with these Brits, mediated perception will be influenced by unmediated sensory actions. And it may seem as if the unmediated perception is altered or lost because the system doesn't necessarily follow the lead of the unmediated perception, right? That is, it can be apparently lost in the outcome, but we believe that it is never lost. Okay. So just a brief aside about coordination, so you know some of what's behind what I'm talking about. Coordination combines entrainment and intentional synchronization. That is coordination that we typically run across. And entrainment is a tendency towards phase-lock behavioral patterns. It's involuntary, spontaneous, and it's also ephemeral. That is, it doesn't last very long. Two people walking in step together down the street, and that is, they'll fall into step readily, and they'll also fall out of step very quickly. This is not something that is sustainable without an intentional component. Intentional synchronization, which is hard work, is the attempt at synchronizing, and this is the sort of thing you see in military marching, ensemble music performance, etc. This is quite a different beast, but they're not unrelated, obviously. Of course, close inspection reveals partially patterned departures from perfect synchronization, which is inevitable and generally desirable. In fact, I think we'd say it's always desirable, and the music is not the only example, because in fact, sustained synchrony is typically pathological, right? Epilepsy, Parkinson's, stuttering, almost anything in the biological world that has sustained synchrony, long-term phase locking, is pathological. And then my little mantra at the bottom is that performance is not perfection disrupted by noise, rather it is coordination strengthened and perfected by fluctuations. Okay, that's the aside. Now, what I want to throw into this mix is a guy that I spent far too many years not studying. When I graduated from college about 100 years ago, my dad said, well, okay, you've gotten a pretty good classical education, someday you're going to need to read something modern, and I suggest you read C.S. Peirce, and then 30 years later, I finally got around to trying to do that. And he was right. It is something that definitely needs to be looked at. Peirce's classic tetratic system is the codependency of objects, what he called representamen, and interpretatives, which all conspire to create science. Right? We're not going to go into tremendous detail about all the ramifications of this. Go read Peirce yourself. He left 100,000 pages unpublished when he died, which is no less or no more penetrable than the stuff he did publish, and how it works. But it's worth it. Signs are inherently dynamic, ever changing and context dependent. They're innovatively active in creating meaning. That is, meaning is not something that just sits in your brain and then you call it up when you need it. It's an active creative process, never the same twice. And it can't be too closely fit to the world, otherwise you lose the thing I talked about on the first page, which is the common ground for communication. And signs essential to the predictive creation of percepts framed by labels, that is names, for objects and relative categories. Meaning, therefore, is emergent and stems lawfully from linguistic rather than biophysical laws. And this is also important. That is, the cognitive system is recently marching to a slightly different drummer. And it is self-consistent, it is lawful, but it's not the laws of physics. It's something else. Consequently, semiotic process need not lead to direct knowledge of the real world, and this is very important for me, was that in fact, unlike other people who sort of talked about science, names and things named, including Kant, the Saussure that supposedly studied linguistics might have run into, he actually was sort of whacked out. He was very neurotic, and he actually cared that all this engine that he was creating would still not get you to reality. It would not get you to the real world. Objects were always mediated. They were not the actual objects. They never had the thing in itself. That's called the humanity. And he thought, and here he was thinking like a true Bayesian, that if you apply this individually, and with the help of, and here's I think the hook to what this group is about, what he called collateral experience. Collateral experience is essentially direct perception. Peirce's description of collateral experience, goes here and there, but at one point he comments, he says, you know what, I really don't know what to say about this. It's absolutely necessary for this machinery to work, but it's a little like the noumena of the Greeks and the Kant. It's the unknowable. It glues everything together. It ties us together with our sensory reality, but in and of itself it's somewhat ineffable. So we have put together this little diagram, which has in the middle there, but with what we're calling configurations of stimulus energy being essentially the sensory interface, and they intervene between whatever else happens and the physical reality. And collateral experiences, as you see, attached to that to the configurations of stimulus energy, and they come in and essentially are a continuous influence on the construction of instances of meaning. And meaning is, as I say, it's ongoing, but it's episodic and iterative. It's not continuous in the sense of just being there all the time. You actually have to go in and construct meaning. So the notes here are, as I said, collateral experience is continuous. Processing environmental signals depends on the coordination of environmental events with two types of perception. One mediated by perceivers, cognition, and language, the other directed by collateral experience. And bringing meaning closer to physical reality is an iterative process. And this is the thing that not many people actually do, but Peirce, as I say, was, I think, a little bit crazed, and he really thought that you could hone in on reality if you just stuck with it long enough. But the collateral experience was essential to that process. So in an analog, say, to supervised learning, the collateral experience acts as kind of teacher signal, and I think this has relevance when you're thinking about acquisition of skills, where I need to get my coffee. In the acquisition of skills, where you have to get, you have something that launches you, that you get from your collateral experience. You get that you are directly tied to the sensory world. You don't have to create the laws of that world. They're just there, but they need to bootstrap into this process, which, as I say, once it becomes increasingly cognitive and categorical, will actually get in the way. I mean, it has tremendous advantages, right? I mean, being able to predict what's going to happen next, even if there's only about an 85% chance that it'll be right, can be enormously useful, because high speed is one of the very important things in our adaptive survival, is being able to do things quickly. And statistically, we'll survive if we do it, right more often than not. Okay. Great. So I'm going to wrap up. Our intent has been to suggest the necessity and a possible starting point for integrating mediated and unmediated aspects of perception in our attempt to understand various instances of big human behavior. Peirce's scheme is intriguing, we think, because it's the only instance we've seen where the attempt to understand how we interact with the world incorporates both the mediated mess of language and cognition and the elegant connection that adaptation, accident, and who knows what else have orchestrated between organisms and their environment. Insofar as this scheme is workable, it will help us begin to examine and describe instances and types of human behavior in their entirety without first having to alter them beyond recognition. I mean, this has been part of our frustration as experimentalists, is that we're getting better and better tools which are actually allowing us to look at, sort of, if you will, in vivo or in situ behavior. But once we do that, we're now dealing with just this complex mess of processes and that sort of scientific addiction to sort of stripping away confounds and I mean, it's a form of reduction, obviously, really alters the thing you're looking at, so that when you finally do get an analysis of this stripped down thing, what's its resemblance to the original phenomenon? And that then is a whole other science. And we'd like to avoid that, just take that out of the loop, right? So an interesting application of this thinking you might want to take a look at, for those of you interested at all in computer science, is Levine's recent paper, which goes into this in great detail. It was really a joy to read. I highly suggest it. Thanks.
Can I put out the microphone? You stress that. Yeah, you stress that semiotic process need not be direct knowledge of the real world for Peirce. But later Peirce, 1909, for instance, in the article Instincts, originally as Instincts, he insists that information, really genuine information, has to be directly connected with the real world.
That's what we're trying to do with this. That's the collateral experience.
Yeah, my question is...
It goes into information, that's the information path, yeah.
So, to try to understand the relation between knowledge and the description of knowledge, would it not be important for you to go into Peirce's notion of information, genuine information? After all, he was the first one, as we know.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Go into Peirce what?
A concept of genuine information, that's meaningful information, that would maybe bring the key for the door you wanted to open.
Yeah, well, it's a good suggestion, and we certainly will keep pondering it. I mean, I think what I keep coming back to, though, is that in all of his various to deal with the collateral experience eventually falls back on, just saying this has to be there. I can tell you a few things about how it has to be there, but not much else. And that seems to be an inheritance of essentially 2,500 years of tradition in the West, in that knowing that, information is not quite the perfect model. Yes, he was absolutely a pioneer in using it, but it's actually problematic, I think. Better? Yeah, sorry. We can talk.
So Peirce worried a lot about the nature of things called signs, and among his options was the concept of indexicals, which he identified as actually closest to law, and that is where I think the entry point to the ecological perspective comes about, because what the ecological point of view is attempting to do, surely, is to identify the word information with lawful regularities, those of situated environmentally, of course, and then the manifestations of those in energy distributions. My personal feeling, having looked at a lot of Peirce, is he would have been quite happy hanging out with ecological psychologists.
Absolutely, I think so. And that's the point I'm trying to make, too. Although I do believe the indexicals are, I think, when you get down to laws, if you push him on it, wouldn't be the laws of physics. It would be...
Well, ecological physics is what we seek to build, so it's not...
Maybe.
We wouldn't get it out of Newton, that's for sure.
No, you absolutely would not get it from Newton, but I think it would be closer to, surprisingly, this direct lawfulness that the linguists have been going on about. It's been interesting being in the linguistics department these last 10 years to see that actually, while I think what they do is crazy, the foundation of it was actually somewhat enlightened. Yeah. Thanks.